fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Got Mr. John Copenhaver here doing the co-host duty. Side saddle.
Happy to be back.
Side saddle with Al.
Side saddle. There we go. It says it all. I guess you're all getting all wrapped up. You're all packed. Have you got all your dresses ironed and stuff? It's the big Bouchercon.
Yeah.
I have. I'm not packed at all. No, honestly, I have. I've been thinking about packing, but not packed yet. So I need to get together though. It's coming up here. I'm headed out Wednesday.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're going in 2 days, why haven't you got? I would think you'd have all your diamonds in the bag and everything.
Like at this point now, I've been traveling so much that I'm in denial that I'm traveling again. So I just try to sort of maintain that illusion till, the crisis point. And
Are you the guy that buys new outfits? Do you buy a new outfit every town you hit?
Oh gosh, no, I don't. That would be expensive. And, I just then, you gotta, pack well. You get better at packing. The more you travel, you get better at packing. You don't forget things as much. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, all organized. But just tell the old man to get another job so you can buy an outfit in each of these. I'm telling you, you deserve it. Royalty.
Oh, well, thank you, Al.
So you were at Killer Nashville? Is that where you were at, or did you go there?
Me? No,
Yeah.
I was not.
At Killer Nashville. Because I'm headed to BoucherCon in the same place the next weekend. So it's a little bit. That would just be a little too much of conferencing in the same place for me. Because I'm teaching now, so I'd be missing too many classes. So.
I see a lot of people that are doing both. That's all. I just thought, wow, it's close together and timing and placing, and it seemed.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are.
It's kind of one long week of conferencing, which I think for some would be delightful. For me, it would just be a little too much. So.
Yeah, I'd have to drink.
Yeah.
Well, now speaking of conferencing and drinking, we've got a friend of your authors here, and he's got a new book out called Double Crossed. And it's a Ronan McCullough thriller. Eliot Parker, thank you for being here.
Hey, Al. Hey, John. Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
Well, let's see. Let's start out, Eliot. So how did you get into this wonderful world of writing? Like, what made you go there?
Well, I was a journalism major in college. I went to Marshall University, and I had a friend who was an English major. And a lot of us English majors and journalism majors ended up taking the same classes. Same liberal arts classes, so we became friends with them. And he was trying to start a creative writing club at Marshall, and he just needed so many bodies to attend and to be quote-unquote members of the club in order to get a charter from the university in order to get it sanctioned as an actual club. So he arm-twisted me and talked me into doing that and to joining the club. And I told him, I said, I'm a journalism major. I'm not used to writing short stories and, poems and all that sort of thing. And he just was kind of like, well, I don't really care. I just need you to show up and be a member and attend and participate. I was like, okay, I could do that. So long story short, the last year I was in the club, we all agreed to write something and we all agreed to workshop it as a group, and then we would send it out for publication by the end of the school year. And this was before you had Submittable and all those electronic devices and programs and platforms to submit things. You had to get out the self-addressed stamped envelopes and the folders and the sealed envelopes and all of that and send things. And so I had written a ghost story, and I sent it to a literary journal called Spec, which was, I think it still is, at Mary Washington College in Virginia, and they accepted it and published it. And that was the very first time I'd had something creatively published. And so that kind of started the writing itch for me, the creative writing itch for me, and I've been really doing it ever since. And so I started working on short stories and getting better at trying to write those and reading a lot of short stories, reading some classical short story writers like F. Scott Fitzgerald, Zora Neale Hurston, and some others to kind of understand how the short story genre works. And that led me to having some more short stories published along the way, and then eventually led me to sort of sticking my writing fingers into writing a novel. And so I've been doing that since about 2012. So it started with short stories, transitioned into novels, but it was from that one experience, that one publication at Mary Washington College and Spec Literary Journal that really got it all started for me.
So what do you identify as, a short story writer or a novel writer? Like, what comes easier for you?
I really enjoy writing novels because I really like the longer form that provides, and I really enjoy the fact that you can tell a story with a little more depth and complexity and intimacy than you can with a short story. Although, depending on the type of short story you're writing and the mode that you're using, the methods that you're using, you can achieve all of those in short stories. But the longer form of the novel gives you a chance, I think, to really delve into your characters more deeply, to really create some plots, especially in mystery and thriller genres, to add some red herrings to that, to really get the reader turning the pages. And so I really like writing novels, although I have found that sometimes when I'm working on a novel and I have either written myself into a corner or written a character into a corner, or I can't really find how I'm going to keep the story moving forward for whatever reason, I will go back and write short stories for a little while, or dabble with a short story that's been on the back of my mind or has been, written down in my notebook as something I wanted to come back to. And I'll, play with that for a while and work on that for a while. And then when I come back to the novel, I have found that, my having stepped away from the novel for a while, but also still writing just in a different form, that I'm able to get myself out of whatever problem that I wrote myself into in the novel. And so I kind of transition back and forth when I'm working on a novel, but I would consider myself more of a novelist than I would a short story writer.
There must be a certain style. When you're writing a short story, you have to be able to get a lot of points across in less space with a lot fewer words. Do you have a method or a special way of doing that?
I think for me, the best way for me to start a short story, and you can use this certainly too, and I do use this when you're writing mystery and thriller novels, but you can do it with short stories too, is just to drop the reader right in the middle of a scene or a situation and kind of let them figure out what's going on and who's involved and what's happening in this particular scene with these characters. And that gives me an opportunity to really dive right into one of the plot points, or maybe in some cases the central conflict of the short story, and introduce the characters that are going to be involved right from page one, so that once the reader gets from page 1 to page 2 of the story, they have a general sense of, who's involved, where we are, and somewhat of a sense of what's happening here, although hopefully they can't figure out everything that's going on in the story. But for me, I found that to be the most effective way to kind of get a reader hooked, and it kind of keeps me from doing the thing I think that all writers do subconsciously, which is kind of the info dump on the first page, describing the setting and describing the time of day and describing the neighborhood or the city or the whatever, because, we always do that when we're thinking about establishing some of those things in a story or a novel. Our mind just kind of gravitates to wanting to put that on the first page. And so for me, getting around that problem is easier when I just sort of drop the reader in the middle of a scene or a part of a scene, and they kind of have to figure out where they are and what's going on. So, that works well. And I think one of the things that Short Stories Out has taught me is that, you really need to pay really close attention to word choice is very important, and precision is very important, because you don't have a lot of time to go into a whole lot of detail. In short stories, you kind of have to keep things moving, but also it's a really great exercise in dialogue. And I feel like that's one area of writing that I'm constantly trying to improve upon, is dialogue, and having characters speaking to each other naturally as if they were in a real conversation, which can be challenging if you've got a male talking to a female, or you have an adult talking to a teenager, or you have people from two different socioeconomic or educational backgrounds having a conversation. It's really challenging. And so short story writing really helps me, I think, get better at writing dialogue, which then transcends into my novels. And so there's a lot to learn. I feel like I always learn something new anytime I write a short story, but getting around some of those problems, kind of getting right into the story, is easier for me if I just sort of drop the reader into something right at the beginning and let them kind of have an understanding of where we are and what's going on from page 1.
Your new book here, Double Crossed. Let's talk about that. What's the premise of this book?
This is the third book in my Ronan McCullough series. So the book started with Fragile Brilliance. It continued with the second book in the series called A Knife's Edge, and then this is the third book in the trilogy called Double Crossed, as you mentioned. And this is set in Charleston, West Virginia, where I grew up. It follows the exploits and the escapades of a police sergeant named Ronan McCullough, who is at the beginning, when he starts Fragile Brilliance, he's an undercover officer working the night shift. And he's still doing some of those tasks in Double Crossed. But essentially what happens in Double Crossed he is sort of recovering physically and mentally from what happened at the end of A Knife's Edge. And he's been put on leave. He's been put on sort of sick leave or administrative sick leave in order to get better. And he just can't stay away. He finds out and gets wind of or hears that there is the body of a federal agent that has shown up on Charleston, West Virginia's west side of town. And so he can't stay away. He goes and tries to find out what's going on just because he just can't stay home and can't stay away, and he's bored and he's nosy and wanting to know what's going on. And his partner, Eric Bonamico, is there investigating. And so, Eric tells him, who Eric has been promoted to lieutenant now after what happened at the end of A Knife's Edge. And so as his senior ranking officer on the scene, he tells Ronan to go home. And Ronan doesn't much like that command and that request. So he does go home, and as he's driving back, there's an explosion down by the riverfront in Charleston. Charleston's got a large riverfront promenade that connects to the Kanawha River, and there's an explosion and a fire that breaks out down there. And so he gets pulled into that almost accidentally. And as the investigation unfolds and he tries to figure out, is the murder of the federal agent and is this explosion connected, he gets embroiled in this cryptocurrency and cybermetrics conspiracy that is going on, where there is a group of people that are trying to move money through cryptocurrency and through cybermetrics. And they've been using a local professor there at one of the universities in Charleston to kind of help facilitate all of this. And so the challenge Ronan has is to find out who this person is, but it's hard to connect the dots because there's not really, the evidence is all electronic and it's untraceable because cryptocurrency, is difficult to track, and it's difficult for the banking industry. It's difficult for law enforcement to track. And so he's fighting, he's trying to find out who's responsible for the explosion and the murder of the federal agent, but he's also trying to track down the cryptocurrency and the cybermetrics aspect of it and how it's involved and why it's involved. And of course, he's not familiar with any of this. And so he has to really kind of educate himself on what this is and how it works. And so he's got a lot going on, but that is kind of the situation he finds himself in Double Crossed.
It's interesting. Did you have to do a lot of research, especially
with the forensics on, I guess, the more technical side of, I mean, it sounds like there must be a lot of forensic investigation. I wondered how much you researched that and how difficult it was to research for this book.
Yeah, that's a great question, John. And I did. I researched a lot. I spent a lot of time. I read a number of articles from, Forbes and Business Week and The Economist and the Wall Street Journal, because they have been doing really a lot of good reporting over the years on cryptocurrency. And I watched a lot of interviews with experts in cryptocurrency from CNBC.com and Fox Business and all of this. And I'm not sure I still 100% exactly understand how it works and exactly understand all the machinations behind it, but it's fascinating. It's fascinating because, it's on the one hand, it is currency and it's recognized as currency, but on the other hand, it's not currency you can touch. It's almost like monopoly money or playing with money, someone's house money that doesn't exist. And what got me interested in this, and I had watched an interview on a channel with a cryptocurrency expert who was working for the FBI or the CIA or something, and he was just talking about how organized crime and how a lot of crime syndicates throughout the world, especially with drug trafficking and drug money, are using cryptocurrency because it can't be traced. And Interpol can't trace it. The FBI can't trace it. It moves like a bank transfer that you would do in your own bank account, but there's no one entity that's responsible for the creation of the value of the currency. And I thought, well, my gosh, that would really make a great plot for a book. How would someone chase that down who didn't know what that was, like me, didn't know much about that? But what if that was used as the impetus to commit a series of terrible crimes and a series of murders? How would you solve that? So that interview that I heard about 2 years ago, about 2.5 years ago, got me interested in that. So I did a lot of research. I spent almost 9 months reading and listening to interviews and just trying to, absorb as much of it as I can. And again, I still don't think I really understand all of it, but I wanted to make sure that what I did understand, I put it into the book, but also didn't want to overwhelm the reader with all the technical jargon and all the, sort of inside baseball, how the sausage is made kind of stuff, because it can get pretty wonky when you get into terminology and how it works and, bitmaps and all of these things that are involved in it. So I wanted the reader to kind of get a general sense of how organized crime uses it, but also not, bore them and bog them down in all the technical details. And so that was a real challenge too when it came to drafting the novel, is making sure that a reader got a sense of what was going on here and how it was being used and how Ronan was going to be able to stop it, but not slow them down with so much detail that their eyes kind of glaze over and they get bored with all the minutia. So it was a great challenge, and I love to be challenged as a writer, and I try to do something different in every book that I write that I didn't do in the previous book. And I didn't know of too many thriller books out there that had been written or were being written where, cryptocurrency was kind of the main impetus of the crime, or an element of the crime. And so it was a great challenge. It really forced me to really research and to get into something I didn't know much about, but I learned a lot and had a lot of fun through the process, even during the revision of it.
It's really interesting because
as we look at writing contemporary crime fiction, and a lot of the elements when you have now shifted over into things that are not easy to dramatize, like forensic research on cryptocurrency, or online sleuthing. We have reached this interesting age where how you tackle making these things dramatically interesting is a real challenge for writers. Or even, of course, the one that everyone moans about is the cell phones are everywhere, so they always muck things up because people could search for the answer very quickly. So that must have been a real challenge in writing this. Did you run into any of those particular issues where you're like, okay, here, how do I make this dramatically interesting? Clearly you've got other things going on in your book, a fire and everything, which obviously lend themselves to that. But I'm sure that was a challenge you faced.
Yeah, it was a tremendous challenge. And when I was doing the first revision of the book, this book took me from idea conception to research to revision about 3 years, and usually I'm about a year and a half from the time time I get an idea about a book to the time I draft it to the time I have the first draft or the second draft ready to be sort of read by beta readers and my editor and all of that. And so this took me twice as long. This took me about 3 years to do it, and I started it right around towards the tail end of COVID, and it was a great challenge. And what I found in doing the second revision or the first revision leading into the second draft, John, was that I had these big sections of, we were talking about info dumps and short stories a minute ago, and I found that I had big sections of sort of info dumps, of very technical, wonky kind of stuff that somebody who studies that or knows a lot about that, or someone in law enforcement like that FBI agent whose interview I watched, that'd be right up their alley. They would know exactly what I was talking about. But I'm thinking about like someone my mother's age, or someone who is just looking for a story, whose eyes would glaze.
Right.
3 paragraphs of explanation of defining what a crypto transfer, how you do a crypto transfer. So, and I'm thinking if I'm bored with this, certainly an average reader is going to be bored with this. And so that was really a challenge, is to keep that information concise. But what I did was oftentimes worked that into a conversation. Like Ronan would have a conversation about an aspect of it with Eric, or he would have a conversation about that with his captain, Ron Ashby. And so it would allow me to break up some of that information into smaller pieces and have, in some cases, Ashby or Eric or someone else that Ronan was working with on the force would ask a question that probably a reader would ask. Well, what does that mean? Ronan would say something and they'd respond and say, I don't understand what you're talking about. And so I kind of used those moments to kind of portray the other character as what a reader might say when they're hearing this information being described. And so that helped me kind of keep the bits of information smaller, and it helped me kind of keep things moving to where it didn't get bogged down in the details. But that was a lot. I had a lot of those big chunks of just this cryptocurrency gobbledygook that I was
right,
and I had been nerding out on for 9 months, but that an average reader might get bored with. So that was the real challenge, and I tried to shrink that down into smaller pieces and work the different aspects of it into different conversations and different chapters so that it would establish a thread but also the reader's eyes wouldn't glaze over at the same time. And so that was really the challenge for me in the revision process. I had to take a lot of time to think about that, and to think about how to do it well to where the reader's being informed but not being bored, and the narrative not being slowed down. So that was probably one of my biggest challenges in the revision process.
Yeah, I think anything that has heavy research, I mean, I run into this very different way with historical fiction where, you're having to sort of convey certain political or social dynamics in a certain time period, but it's not stuff that people would necessarily sit around and talk about. So like, how do you figure out, or they might, but not directly, that sort of fitting everything into a conversation so it feels natural and the reader's informed, but the narrative's flowing forward is always a challenge. So tell us a little bit about Charleston, West Virginia. I think it's a fascinating setting. It's an Appalachian city, which you don't usually think of Appalachian City. Like, can you talk a little bit about as a why, first of all, why you set your novels there, and second of all, a little bit about what makes it unique?
Oh, sure, yeah. I grew up there, and like a lot of cities, large and small in Appalachia, Charleston is changed a lot since I grew up there. A lot of it has to do with the fact that industry has moved out. When I was growing up, I was talking about the West Side. I grew up on the West Side of Charleston. I was talking about where the dead federal agent's body shows up in Double Crossed, and I said it there because I grew up from there. I grew up there, and in fact, the location where his body's discovered is a place that I drove by probably 4 or 5 times a week. Going home and going to school and going to work and coming back and that sort of thing. So I'm very familiar with it, but that is a city and a community that Carbide built, that DuPont built, that the John Amos plant built, that the coal mines in the eastern part of the city built, and all of those industries are gone now. And so, I mean, Carbide now, Dow, has just a very tiny footprint from what they used to. But I mean, that used to be, a place that employed 1,500 to 3,000 people. And it wasn't just laborers. I mean, it was chemists, it was accountants, it was scientists, it was, a variety of what we would consider, white collar jobs in addition to the day laborers. And it literally built so many neighborhoods and parts of Charleston. And so, that has changed, and what has moved in, unfortunately, has been drugs, has been crime, has been a population of individuals who are looking to cause trouble because the business and industry has declined. Of course, that affects the tax base. That has affected the city budgets, and they've had moments in the last 20 years, at least on the police department, where they've had reductions in force. And, they haven't had as many officers as they normally would have. And so, that's just sort of ringing the dinner bell and allowing crime to move in. And one of the things that I noticed, and one of the reasons that, I choose Charleston, it's a place I'm familiar with, but in talking to a lot of law enforcement officers who, work in Charleston and outside of Charleston, who were agreed to talk to me about how things work, they said, when a criminal element takes advantage and they move into a city that is either not under control, or they move into an area where there's not a strong police presence, it creates mayhem. And in some ways, those effects last for years after the situation is resolved. And so there's a residual effect. And so that's kind of what starts the series in Fragile Brilliance is there's a criminal element that moves its way into Charleston. And in a Knife's Edge, and certainly in Double Cross, that element is still hanging on. The lingering effects of having this crime wave move through is still sort of there and still kind of affecting citizens. But I like Charleston because I love cities right by the water. And so Charleston, buttresses up against the Kanawha River, which runs kind of north-south, and then the Elk River, which runs east-west of town. So you have these large bodies of water, and I love cities near bodies of water. Charleston also is one of the very few cities in Appalachia that has 3 interstates that run through right through the middle of town. You have Interstate 64, Interstate 79, and Interstate 77 all converge right in the middle of town, like literally right downtown. And so anybody that is traveling those roads has to come through Charleston if you're going to continue your route to Pittsburgh or to Lexington or to Charlotte or wherever it is that you're going outside of the area. So it makes it a fun place for people to come and sort of set up shop if you're a bad guy, because you've got to eventually, come through Charleston, whether you want to or not. And so, one of the things in terms of making it unique, I think, unfortunately, there has been a large population loss, and people my age and younger have left, unfortunately, for job reasons and other issues, and they've moved to, Cincinnati and Charlotte and Richmond, Virginia, and D.C. and Pittsburgh and other places for job opportunities. But, what makes it unique is the people that are still there and the people that are from there are very passionate about the city. They're very passionate about growing up there. They have a lot of fond memories, and they are devoted and dedicated to seeing Charleston be the best that it can be. And there's a lot of Appalachian communities, John, that aren't like that. I mean, there's a lot of Appalachian communities that kind of give into the fatalism model, which is, the jobs are gone and crime's moved in. Well, this is all we're going to be. This is how our town's going to be forever, or our city's going to be forever. And the people in Charleston don't believe that. They believe that it is a place that can be vibrant and wonderful and special. And so I take kind of that attitude and I work that into Ronan's character a lot, because one of the questions I get from readers all the time is why does Ronan put up with this? He's not from Charleston originally. He's from Massachusetts. He kind of stumbles upon Charleston. He leaves his family. His father was a steel worker. His sister ends up having a child out of wedlock, and Ronan just can't. He's struggling with his sexuality while all this is going on. So he just leaves Massachusetts, and he says in Fragile Brilliance, he ends up in West Virginia basically because he ran out of gas in his truck and he had to stop and get gas. And the first place he stopped was West Virginia, and how nice everybody was to him. And so that spirit of Charleston being worth saving and protecting, and the people there, being worth, watching out for, is something that I imbue his perspective and his attitude with, and that comes from having grown up there. So, it is a great place. I hope it becomes the great place that it is and was when I was growing up. I mean, they've got a lot of work to do. They've had about a 20-year lull of economic activity and people moving out and population loss, but there are signs that things are coming back, and there's a core group of leaders, both elected leaders and community members, who are really rallying the community to get Charleston back to the way it was. And so that's encouraging and inspiring. So it really is a unique place. It's a unique place, culturally, socioeconomically. But the people are great, and the topography is great. It's a great city to set a story if you want to have a thriller series ongoing, because it's got the ports, it's got the riverbank, it's got the river conversion, it's got the 3 interstates, as I mentioned, that come together. It's just a great place to have all kinds of mayhem take place.
Well, and so Ronan, maybe tell us a little bit more about him, and also what's your relationship with him? Like, how do you see him or feel him, or do you hear him? Kind of get into that.
Yeah, sure. We learn this more. He doesn't touch on this too much in Double Cross, although he kind of alludes to some of it in some conversations with his boyfriend Ty. But as I mentioned, Ronan kind of ends up in West Virginia. His family life is falling apart, sort of. In some degree, his dad was a laborer, was a sheep worker there in Massachusetts, outside of Boston. His dad, from what we get, is sort of a hard, tough, cold man. A few words, a man that didn't really, I don't want to say not know how to be a father, but wasn't very loving and very vocal and very effusive in his love and praise for his children. Ronan has a sister, Melissa, who's kind of a loose cannon. She ends up having a baby when she's in high school out of wedlock. She doesn't know who the father is, although Ronan mentions him by name and says he was a deadbeat, and says, how in the world could you be with him, much less have a child with him? And again, Ronan's struggling with his sexuality a little bit during all this time. And, his father kind of senses that something's going on with Ronan, and Ronan won't talk about it. And so all this chaos sort of enveloping his family life, he just one day leaves. He just gets in his car and drives, and basically kind of drives until he runs out of gas, and that brings him to West Virginia. And he talks about how when he arrives in West Virginia, that he met so many kind, friendly people that were interested in him, not to make fun of him or want something from him. They were interested in his story. Like, how'd you get down here from Massachusetts? Or you kind of have a funny accent. You don't sound like one of us. Where are you coming from? And so he just kind of makes West Virginia kind of his de facto home. And he decides to join the police department there in Charleston, and kind of works his way up through, being an officer up to being an undercover investigator. And so that's kind of how he sets up shop in Charleston, and he meets his boyfriend Ty in a situation where Ronan and his colleagues were storming a house where some criminals had been barricaded, and there was Ronan had gotten injured in that process of arresting those criminals. And so Ty is the charge nurse at Charleston Mercy Hospital, which is a Trauma 1 hospital. So anybody involved with the police department gets treated there. If there's a criminal that is arrested but somehow injured in the process of being apprehended or taken into custody, the police officers escort him there. So that's what Ronan is doing there. He meets Ty. Ty's the nurse that treats him. And so, they strike up a conversation and start talking back and forth. And then Ronan starts becoming interested in Ty. So he just starts showing up in the emergency room at random times and looks for random reasons to go to the ER to talk to Ty. So that kind of really gets him to stay, convinces him to stay in Charleston. And the story kind of picks up from there in terms of and what makes it interesting is their two lives, not only personally but professionally, are always intersecting. And Ronan is always having to talk to Ty, and Ty's always oftentimes treating or being involved in the treatment of some of these suspects and criminals that get brought to the emergency room. And so you've got that personal and professional crossover that happens. And, Ronan certainly does not want, and for good reason, does not want the other officers on the force to know that he's gay. And so he is fiercely protective of that, and he's fiercely protective of making sure that nobody knows that he and Ty are in a relationship. And I won't get into all how that happens, but that creates a lot of tension in their relationship because I think Ty is more comfortable with his sexuality and doesn't think that if anybody knew they were together, it would be a big deal. But Ronan is trying to protect his job and everything that he has built as a police officer. In terms of how I view him, he's so much not like me that it's so much fun to get into his head. He's very loyal. He's very devoted. He is someone that if he likes you, he likes you. He's someone that if he doesn't like you, he doesn't like you, and there's not many things you can do to change his opinion. He sometimes doesn't work well with others. He sometimes doesn't listen to orders very well. He, as a police officer, will push the envelope if needed, and if need be, to help solve a case or push an investigation forward when it seems like people are getting bogged down in the bureaucracy and the procedural things that have to be done. He'll just cut right around that and just go ahead and do what needs to be done, which often puts him at odds with his partner, Eric, and often puts him at odds with his captain, Ron Ashby, and gets him into trouble that way. And he is also someone at the same time who is a little insecure. He's just not quite sure. He's pretty secure in himself as a police officer, but he's not really secure with himself in terms of being someone involved in a relationship with another man, although he loves Ty. He's not always sure how to kind of be that person that Ty needs him to be. And I mentioned a moment ago that Melissa, his sister, had that child out of wedlock when Ronan was younger before he arrives in West Virginia. Well, at the beginning of Fragile Brilliance, and this carries over into Double Crossed, at the beginning of Fragile Brilliance, his nephew, Nick, who Melissa had out of wedlock, shows up at Ronan's front door wanting to live with him because he and Melissa are not getting along. He's 18 years old. He's a teenager. He and his mom are engaged in all those teenager fights that happen. And he just shows up one day in the midst of Ronan's in the middle of a pretty serious investigation, and Ronan's getting ready to go to work, and he hears a knock on the door, and there's his nephew who he hasn't had a lot of contact with and spoken with in a number of years, showing up at his door saying that he wants to live with him. So he's got that going on as well. He's trying to not only learn how to be a good partner to Ty, but he's also trying to figure out how do I be an uncle and how do I raise a teenager who is a lot like him, very headstrong and very focused and very driven on what he likes. But he's also like his sister in that he kind of is a little mouthy and a little challenging and isn't afraid to kind of give it back to Ronan, or Ronan's questioning him about things or kind of trying to discipline him in some ways. So he's got that dynamic as well. So all of those things that he does and he's involved with is very different from me. In terms of myself personally, and I think all writers have a little bit of our personal selves and all the characters that we create in some way, shape, or form, but he's so different from me, but he's such a fascinating character because he's got some of these dualities that you can really play with at various points throughout a book, and it affects his relationships with certain people in different ways, and it affects his relationships in other ways with other people differently. So he's always got, sort of these physical and emotional things that he's challenged with, and kind of trying to juggle everything and keep everything going, and the stress and anxiety and the pressure of trying to keep all those balls in the air, so to speak, oftentimes, makes him do and say things that he probably wouldn't do otherwise.
So, who would you say,
or maybe several who's inspired your writing? Like, who do you look to as, they don't have to be crime writers, but I imagine they are. Who's inspired you and why?
Oh gosh, my favorite classical writer is John Steinbeck. I read John. I first got exposed to him as a sophomore in high school, reading Of Mice and Men, and then my junior year in American Lit, we got to pick an independent book project, and I picked The Grapes of Wrath because I loved Of Mice and Men so well. And everybody's like, well, if you like Mice and Men, you got to read, The Grapes of Wrath. And I read that. And so that led me on a quest of reading everything Steinbeck's ever written. I think his greatest book, and probably one I think is an absolute masterpiece of writing and storytelling, certainly in the 20th century, is East of Eden, which...
I agree.
Yeah.
That's a great book. It's a great book. People don't realize what a page turner it is either. But anyway.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And, he won the Pulitzer for Grapes of Wrath, but I love Grapes of Wrath, and I loved Of Mice and Men and The Pearl and Travels with Charlie and everything that he's done. But the East of Eden, I think, is his best work, because it's basically his retelling of the Cain and Abel story from the Bible. And it's just a masterpiece of writing and storytelling. And I love Steinbeck because he writes settings so well, but he's so good at making bad characters redeemable. Even Kathy Ames in East of Eden, who's just one of the worst female characters ever written in literature. You still, as awful as she is, you sympathize with her. You understand
right.
in some ways why she is the way that she is, and he's so good at that. And I've used that when I'm creating villains for my thriller novels, because every villain in a thriller novel can justify in their own mind, even if it's abhorrent to the reader or the protagonist, can justify why they're doing what they're doing. And Steinbeck was so good at kind of, infusing those bad characters with some redeemable qualities to where you didn't maybe not approve or like them, but you sympathize in some way, on some level, you understand why they're doing what they're doing. So he's my favorite classical writer. I think my favorite contemporary writer, and I'm so sorry that he's gone now, is Pat Conroy. I think sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, his writing is just absolutely breathtaking, and absolutely just makes you stop. And I've read all of his books, and I have so many things highlighted and sticky notes attached, because they're just some of the most beautiful sentences crafted. And so I learned a lot about language and simile and metaphor and all of that through him. So those two writers had a huge influence on me. Other writers that I love, Nathaniel Hawthorne, The Scarlet Letter, one of my favorite books ever. I love Zora Neale Hurston's. We talked about her short stories, Their Eyes Were Watching God. Toni Morrison is another writer who really influenced me, because one of the things I love about Toni Morrison is, in a lot of her books, the subtle is the most devastating. It's not the person that is going to commit a rape like in Sula or one of her other stories. It's the subtle thing. It's the look that the mother gives the daughter. It's the crossed arms that someone says in response to something that is so devastating. So I learned a lot about how subtle movements and subtle gestures can be just as devastating as a big physical act. And Harper Lee's book was wonderful. And gosh, just so many. In terms of crime writers, I love Walter Mosley. His Easy Rollins series is one of my all-time favorites. C.J. Box is magnificent. His Joe Pickett series is just so great. David Baldacci's wonderful. I could just go on all day for all the writers that have influenced. And I know when this interview's...
It's a pretty good list.
Yes, and I know when this interview's over, I'm going to have like 10 more that I've mentioned. I'm like, oh,
that's good. It's good to have a long
writer.
list.
I should have mentioned that, right? Yes, but those, I find those writers, the ones I mentioned, and I know I'm leaving some out, but those writers' books I go back to constantly when I'm needing inspiration, or I want to think about, or how did Toni Morrison use that gesture to convey this, or how did Harper Lee, handle the socioeconomic differences in a community, and all of these things.
Eliot, what is your social media website, all that good stuff where readers and fans can find you?
Sure. My website is eliotparker.com, ELIOT1L1TPARKER.com. There you can find out information about Double Crossed and the Ronan McCullough series. I have another series with a female homicide detective named Stacy Tabbitt that's set in Cleveland, Ohio. You can find out more about those books. You can contact me through my website if you have a question or you ever want to talk about anything. I'm on Facebook, X, and Instagram. I'm not on Snapchat. I'm not on TikTok. Both of those apps, I think, are overwhelming, and I'm just not. I don't take pictures of myself and record videos of me dancing and eating, so no one is going to want to see anything of that. So, but I'm on Facebook. You can just type my name in, and I should come up. I'm on Instagram and on X, or formerly Twitter. And so if you just type my name, Eliot Parker, I'm one of the few Eliots with just one L and one T. So if you type my name in, I should be the first one that pops up on any of those platforms. But yeah, I'd love to talk to readers anytime, talk about writing anytime, talk about books anytime. Love to hear from folks. So folks are free to reach out to me anytime.
Well, fantastic. We'll have that up on our website along with your book, Double Crossed. Again, Eliot Parker, thank you for being here.
Thank you guys very much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.